as fin_impl user. And what did we do? We went into the security console and we created a user. Let's go into the security console tools. And you know why this warning message is coming, right? It's just to highlight that a sync job has not been run in the past 24 hours. I'll talk about this when we talk about the administration part. Going to users, and we've created a fusion.user1 yesterday. Search for it. And for this user, we have assigned employee abstract role to give him access to the screens that every employee would need access, and such type of basic roles which would give access to a bare minimum functionality is called as abstract roles. And apart from the abstract role, we have also assigned him a couple of job roles related to AR, so that he would be able to work as an AR specialist or in the accounts receivable module. And we've also assigned him a general accountant job role. So when you assign job roles to the user, that user would get access to the screens or the functionality of the modules. So that is why if when we logged in as fusion.user1 into the instance, we were able to see all the work areas related to general accountant or GL as well as AR. Let's do one more bit here. Let's edit the user and let's add in one more role to this, a couple of more roles. I'm doing this for a reason. Accounts payable. Yeah, let's add in accounts payable invoice supervisor. This is an AP role. And let's also add in an accounts payable manager role. Okay, so I've also added in a couple of roles related to AP. So this particular user should be able to access AP module now, AR, and the GL module. Save and close. Now let's log into this application as fusion.user1 from a different browser. And as you can see, yes, I've got access to receivables, payables, and I also have access to general accounting. But as we noticed yesterday, if you go into the individual work areas, be it journals or if you try to create a receivables invoice or payables invoice, user would not be able to do it because as you can see here, there's no data in there, right? So if I click on the dropdown, I don't have access to any business units. So which means, yes, I've got access to the screens, but I won't be able to do anything in there. So if I try to create a transaction, click on the dropdown, there are no BUs available. So this brings us to the second bit, like how do you grant data access to the users? How do you give access or data access to this particular user? So to grant data access to the users, you can do it in two ways. You could use a manage data access for users task. There is this particular set of tasks that you could use to, you can go into this particular task, search for a user, and then you can grant him data access. And that's one option that is available. Let's see how to grant data access using that option. You copy this particular task, manage data access for users, and you go back into the session where you have logged in as a fin_impl user. Click on done here, and you click on the drop down, go into setup and maintenance. And this is FSM screen, functional setup manager screen. We will talk about it in detail in the next module. So all you have to do is click on this tasks ribbon and click on the search here. So you have two search options here, or within the FSM screen, you have a search option. and you have an option to select different modules or offerings here. And if you search for a specific task here, task is nothing but a setup. So if you search for a specific task or setup here, application would search for that particular task within this particular offering. Okay, so if you want to do a global search, so this is like searching for a specific task within that offering in the compensation management. And if you change this to financials, and if you search for a specific task here, application would search for the task within the financials offering. Instead, if you click on this tasks ribbon, and if you click on this search option that you see here, so this is like a global search. I mean, if you search for a task here, application would search for that task across offerings. Okay, this is like a global search. So you paste in the task there, could say manage data access for users, and it's appropriately named as well, right? This task can be used to manage data access for users. And you can go into that, get into the task. And you would see two tabs in here, users without data access and users with a data access. So the user that we are dealing with now, he doesn't have any data access yet. So you could search for that user here. You could search for that user here, fusion.user1. As you type in, you should see the search kicking in. Search for fusion.user1. Pick him up. And after you pick him up, if you click on the roles here, you would notice that only the roles assigned to this user is appearing here. And let's say I want to give access to a GL module first. So I would select a general accountant role and search for it. You could see that there is, I could give him access to a data access set or a ledger. So how do you grant him access to it? To grant access to it, what I can do is I can click on the plus icon here, and I can search for a fusion.user1. Okay, I can search for fusion.user1. Select the role, select it as general accountant. And based on the role you select, remember some modules work at a GL level and some modules work at a subledger level. So if you take the case of a GL, general ledger, or a fixed assets, so these modules work at a ledger level. And if you take the case of AP, AR, PO, these are the subledger modules, and these modules work at a business unit level. In EBS, business unit is called as operating unit, in case you are coming from that background, right? So these modules operate at operating unit level, right? In ERP Cloud, they operate at business unit level. But if you take the case of general ledger or of fixed assets, they work at a ledger level. So when you grant data access to the users, depending on the role, if that role is related to general ledger, you would grant him access to the ledger. If that role is related to AP or AR, you would grant him access to the business unit. And you don't need to worry about these levels. It would automatically be displayed here. So based on the role you select, that particular security context will appear here. So the moment you select general accountant, it would show you two options there, a data access set or intercompany organization. This data access set is nothing but a ledger for you. So whenever you create a ledger in ERP Cloud, there would be a data access set that would be created. And that data access set would have the same name as that of a ledger. Okay, and you could pick that one up. And if you click on the drop down in the security context, you would see a list of ledgers. And you can say, for example, this user needs to work in, needs to deal with US primary ledger. He's working from US and he has to deal with a US primary ledger. What do you do in such case? You would search for US primary ledger, pick it up, and that's how you grant access to the user. And one key thing to note is, yes, depending on the role, what you give access to will change. If it is a GL or FA role, you would give him access to ledger. If it's AP or AR role, you would give him access to a business unit. And when you grant user access to a data, you would be doing it at the role level, not at the user level. And what I mean by that is, if you select AP role here, okay, let's go ahead and add another row. Fusion.user1, and let's select AP related roles. AP invoice supervisor, and and you notice that, yeah, after you select that, select AP manager, and you click on the security context, you would notice that it would automatically be filtered based on the module. AP module works at business unit level, so you could see business unit appearing there. And you click on the drop down, and you could select what business unit you want to give him access to. I want to give him access to US1 business unit. So pick it up. And then you have an option to duplicate the records to make it to add the role assignment easily. You could duplicate the record, and then you can edit the copy of it. And here you could change the role from accounts payable manager to accounts payable invoice supervisor. And I want to give him access to a business unit. And I would select the same US1 business unit. Search for it, add it in. And what am I doing here? I'm giving a Fusion.user1 access to AP and GL modules. And for AP, I'm giving him access to a specific BU called US1 business unit. And for GL, I'm giving him access to US primary ledger. Save and close. And if you're going to users with data access tab now, and if you search for Fusion.user1, search for the data access, you should see the data access that you have granted him so far. And if you log out and log in back as Fusion.user1 here, you would notice that user would have access to the modules, access to the data as well now. So if you go into GL, first, if you go into journals, you could see some data populated now, and you could also see US primary ledger in there. And that means this user has now got a data access of US primary ledger. And you click on it, and you would also have an option to create a ledger. So you could create a ledger, and when you create a you could create a journal, and when you create a journal, it gets created in US primary ledger. So which means, yes, user has now got access to US primary ledger. He's able to see the data from that ledger, and he would also be able to perform all these tasks in US primary ledger. Now let's go back and go into a payables responsibility, payables role, go into invoices. And you could also see the data popping up now. So you are seeing data here, and that itself indicates that yes, this user has got access to at least one BU from where the values are getting, from where the transactions are getting picked up and displayed there. So these cards would help user to get down to the work that they have to do pretty quick. So most usually you would have to view the invoices that you have created in the past 24 hours, right? So you could click on this, that would show the invoices. And if there is a problem with the invoices, they would show up here. So what I could also do is, now that I've got access to US1 BU, I could click on create invoice. And if I go into business units, business unit dropdown, I would be able to see the option showing up there. So if I click on the dropdown, I could see that I've got access to US1 BU now. So this is one way to grant data access. How do you do it? You use a task called manage data access for users. You go to FSM and you use this task to grant data access to the users based on role. And there's one more point that I want to highlight here. If you go back and if you go into receivables, billing, you could see that this particular user still has not got access to any data in AR module. And it makes sense as well, right? Because remember what I mentioned earlier, when you grant access of the data to the user, you don't do it at a user level, you do it at a role level. Okay, so which means when you give access of US1 business unit to a Fusion.user1, you don't do it at a user level. Instead, you're doing it at a role level. So you're giving Fusion.user1 access to US1 business unit, but only for AP roles, not for AR roles. So that's why even if I go into AR, I'm still not able to find any data in here. And if you try to create a transaction, you would still not be able to find any business units in the dropdown. Okay, so these are the basics. Basics. You have to get them right. Otherwise, it would remain a confusion forever. Okay, so 2 key bits. Giving access to a functionality is different from giving access to data. To give data access, there are 2 ways you could do it, and we have seen one way of doing it now, right? You could use this task, and when you grant data access, you would remember that you are doing it at a role level, not at the user level. Now let's see the other way to grant a data access to the users. You've got another option as well to grant data access to the users. How do we do it? There is something called as a data roles. We have seen abstract role so far, and we have seen job role, right? There's another type of role called a data roles. And these data roles, as you could make out from the name, they would just provide data access to the users. And let's go back into the security console. And let me switch back to the security console here. Could use the quick navigation options to go to users. Let me go back from home page. Yeah, go from security console. Go back to users, Fusion.user1. And to this user, what you could do is you could also assign data roles and grant access to the user, grant access of data to the user. So let's see how to do that. Click on add role, and you could, if you see, you have, when you search for general accountant, you could see this. From what I mentioned yesterday, you have to pick up the roles that start with or underscore. So this is what we picked up earlier. And if you look at the general accountant roles, if you scroll down, you could see that there are roles with the same name, but at the end of it, you have Australia primary ledger, Belgium primary ledger. So you have a sort of a job role showing up there. So you have underscore job and you have underscore Australia primary ledger in there. So this is like a combination of a job role plus a data role. And if you assign this particular role to the user, this would give user access to the GL module, plus it would also give him access to the Australia primary ledger. So this is like a combination of a job role plus a data role. So this is another way to give a data access to the users. So you could pick up a specific ledger, a general accountant role, and you could assign it to him. So you could, if you assign this particular ledger, say Australia primary ledger, assign it. Save and close. If you sign out and sign in again here, you would notice that if I go into GL, I should also be able to see the Australia primary ledger in there. If you notice, I'm not sure if you guys have paid attention to it or not. Earlier, we didn't have this change button. When if user has access to only one ledger, you won't see this change button. But if the moment user has access to multiple ledgers, they would see this change button. And if they click on it, they would see a drop down and they would be able to pick a different ledger if they want. And how did we grant this user access to US primary ledger? We have done it using this particular task called manage data access for users. And how did we give that user access to Australia primary ledger? We have done it by using a data role. Okay, so there are two ways to grant data access to the users. So all this story is fine. Yeah, we are assigning roles and it is showing up on the user interface. This is fine. But what exactly is happening in the background? I think Nivruti has asked about this yesterday. Like, what exactly is going on in the background? How exactly user is getting to see these navigation options? Let's try to deep dive now into the role definitions. So when you go into a role definitions, let me show you one particular slide. So this is the backbone of the security framework in ERP Cloud. You have got okay. Let's go from here to let's use a bottom up approach here, or top down approach here. So this is a job role that we have assigned to the user, right? Accounts payable invoice supervisor. So when you hire a person, you hire him to perform a specific job, right? You hire him into a job role. So you have hired a person as an accounts payable invoice supervisor. And as part of his job, he would have to perform many duties. And some of them would be the core duties, some of them might be additional duties. And a specific job would require you to perform multiple duties. And those duties, what Oracle did is it has created a duty roles to control that. So if I'm an accounts payable invoice supervisor, what would be one of the key duty that I have to perform? It would be to process payables invoices. So what Oracle did is it has created a duty role called payables invoice processing, and it has assigned that duty role to the job role, so that when a user is assigned this accounts payable invoice supervisor role, that user would have, or it would have the required privilege to perform this particular duty. Like he would have the required access to a process payables invoices, because that is one of his duty. And to perform this particular duty, like to process payables invoices, what does it involve? A processing payables invoice involve? It would involve creating payables invoice, editing it, managing it. So I've just listed on few to make it easy for you guys to grasp the concept. There could be 100 plus privileges assigned. There could be plenty more privileges assigned to duty roles, and there would be plenty more duty roles assigned to job role as well. So it would be a many to one relationship. There could be many privileges assigned to duty roles and many duty roles assigned to job roles, and a single job role can be assigned to many users as well. And a single user also can have multiple job roles. We have already seen it, right? We have assigned a single user, we have assigned multiple job roles. So this is the crux of the security in ERP Cloud. So you have, what Oracle did is it has created thousands of privileges. You don't have to create these privileges. You cannot create them even if you want to. So these privileges are nothing but a task that a person has to perform as part of his duty, as part of a duty. And those duties would be, so these privileges are created and those privileges are grouped together into relevant duty roles. And those duty roles are assigned to the job role. So if I'm an accounts payable supervisor, one of my duty would be to pay or to process payables invoice. So to do that, I would need access to these particular tasks. So to give accounts payable invoice supervisor ability to perform these tasks, this is what Oracle did. It created the privileges, assigned them to duty role, and that duty role is assigned to job role. And this is precisely why the moment you assign accounts payable invoice supervisor role to a specific user, the moment you assign accounts payable invoice supervisor role to a specific user, if you go into invoices, yes, they would be able to see the work areas. And if they go into invoices, if you click on the tasks ribbon, you would also be able to see all the tasks required to process invoices. You would see something more as well, but we'll be talking about one of the core duties. Yes, a job would require you to perform multiple duties, right? And yes, we're talking about one specific duty, which is to process invoices. So you see here, create invoice, manage invoice, validate invoice, import invoice. So all these manage invoice. So all these are nothing but a task that invoice supervisor needs to perform. How did he got access to these tasks? He got access to it in this way. So there were privileges created and created by Oracle, and they were assigned to duty role, and that duty role is assigned to job role. And this job role has been assigned to the user, and that's why user is able to see these tasks. And if you look at the role definition, we would go into it again. If you look into the duty role definition, you would notice that there is a close correlation between the duty role privileges and the options that you see within here. Okay, or the tasks that appear within the user interface. So if I go back into this particular screen, go into roles, and if you search for, say, accounts payable invoice supervisor role, search for it. And you could see the role name, code, and the description. And you would be able to see the privileges assigned to that particular role. You could, when you look at the job role definition, we usually, when you look at the job role definition, it is wise to, or you should usually, you could expand it towards the roles here, and that would show you all the roles and the privileges that this job role inherits. Okay, so a single job role might inherit many different roles, and you could easily make out from the name itself, like what that role lets this particular user do. So if you look at this particular one, what does it say? It would let this particular user submit a payables invoice aging report. Okay, and similarly, you've got n number of roles assigned to that particular job role, which would let the supervisor, invoice AP supervisor, perform the duties that he is supposed to do. And if you search for the underscore duty here, so if you say underscore duty, that would list down the duty roles. Okay, that would list down the duty roles. And if you see here, there would be few duty roles. And one of the important duty that particular user needs to perform would be to process invoices, right? So you could search for it directly otherwise. Okay, AP, payables, invoice processing duty. So you see this particular duty. So this is one of the duty the supervisor needs to perform, and this particular duty would require him to perform certain tasks, right? So those tasks would have been added. Those tasks would have been added as privileges to this particular duty. So what you could do is you could copy this, and you could also search for the duty role definition here. So a single job role can have multiple duty roles assigned. And if you search for a specific duty role, and when you search for a duty role, you should expand the duty role towards the privileges, not towards the roles. So because if you remember, if you go back to the slide, a job role will have duty roles and the duty role will have privileges. So when you look at the job role definition, you leave this as roles. But when you look at the duty role, when you look at the job role definition, leave this as roles. When you are searching for a duty role definition, you change this to privileges so that you would be able to see the privileges assigned to that duty role. Okay, and what do you see in here? This particular payables invoice processing duty gives the supervisor authority or ability to perform these actions. He would be able to cancel payables invoice, delete invoice, edit invoice, and all that stuff. Okay, basically to process payables invoice. So this is how, in short, security. This is the basic framework that you need to understand. You have privileges, thousands of them created by Oracle out of the box, and those are grouped into duty roles. Again, you have plenty of them given by Oracle, and those duty roles are also assigned to job roles. And you again have thousands of job roles given by Oracle. And what we normally do is, very rarely you come across a requirement to create a new job role, especially when you do a BIP report. If you register a BIP report as an ESS job, if you want to give access of your ESS job to others for a different user to be able to submit it, that's when you would create a custom role. But in most of the scenarios, client would ask you to customize a seeded role. So they might be okay with the seeded roles given by Oracle to the most part of it, but they might want you to take out one or two privileges from the seeded role given by Oracle. Say, for example, they're okay with this accounts payable invoice supervisor role. So the way it works is, first you would assign this role to a specific user, and you would pass on that user details to the client, and they would sign in as that user. They would see what all access that user gets as accounts payable invoice supervisor, and they would compare it with the current level of access that the clients give to their accounts payable invoice supervisors. And if they think that something is missing, they might ask you to add it to the seeded role. And if they think that there are some additional access being given to the users, which they're not supposed to give, they might ask you to remove those privileges from a supervisor, from the standard roles. So in most of the scenarios, you would be tweaking the standard roles, either adding the privileges or removing them. And please remember a thumb rule: whenever you have to customize a seeded role, don't edit it directly. Okay, so you have to make a copy of it and then make changes within that seeded role. Oracle will not stop you if you try to edit a seeded role. Okay, you would be able to do it without, you won't be stopped from editing a seeded role. Okay, we'll go to the the custom role creation and the comparison stuff in a while. But if you look at the the details now, so if you look at the hierarchy, it's privileges assigned to duty roles assigned to job roles. And you have these types of roles: abstract role, such as employee. You've got job roles, and these job roles would be in line with the roles that you see in the job ads. Even if you go to LinkedIn or any other job site, you would probably see the jobs with these roles, right? They might say that they're looking for general accountant or HR specialist. So what Oracle tried to do is it tried to keep the job roles in line with the real-time roles that are available in the market. And you also have data roles, which would grant access to the users. And this is one way to give a data access to the users. Another way is to use manage data access for users task. And you've got for the job roles, underlying definition of the job roles, you have duty roles assigned to the job roles, and those duty roles have privileges. And let me talk about some of the important roles that you need to be aware of. So there is this particular role called IT security manager role. So this is a role again. IT security manager is a role, and if you assign this role to a specific user, it is like making that particular user a system administrator. Remember, in EBS, you assign a role called system administrator, right? You assign a responsibility called system administrator. So this is an equivalent of that. So if you assign a specific user IT security manager role, then that user would have all the access to all the security aspects in the console or in the application. And one such option would be the security console. So if you see here, yeah, if you assign IT security manager role, you would get access to all the security related stuff, and that includes access to the security console under the tools, which would let user be able to do anything as far as security of the application is concerned. He would be able to edit the roles. So this is like a very regulated access. You wouldn't, maybe in a dev SAT and UAT, people might not care. And you would probably be able to assign this role to yourself and you would be able to play around with it. But yeah, typically starting upwards from UAT, users would not be given this particular access. Okay, and there would be very a few limited users who would be given this access. And because if you know the repercussions of it, right? If you give this access to the users, they would be able to change anything in the application. Okay, they could delete users, edit them, block them, or they could change the seeded data roles. And there is something more as well in that. We didn't talk about encryption yet. There is an option to generate PGP certificates within the security console. And those security certificates might also be compromised if you give this access to an unauthorized person by mistake. Okay, so how does a user gets access to security console and all other security related stuff? You could do it by granting him an IT security manager role. And there is another role called application implementation consultant. So let me show you that particular role here. So if you go into security console, go into users. I'll not assign these roles to fusion.user1, but I just want to show you those roles. Edit it, add role, and you could say IT security manager. So this is a role. If you assign this particular role, IT security manager, that would give user access to all the security aspects. And that includes a security console, with the help of which we came into this screen in the first place. And you've got another role called application implementation consultant. Application implementation consultant. And this application implementation consultant role, this is again another super powerful role. If you assign this role to a specific user, you would grant him all the access that a user needs as an implementation consultant. And what does that access mean? That access means if you click on the drop down here on the user, I could see personalization task and I could see troubleshooting after that, right? But in between these two, there is an administration task. And under administration, there is an option to go to FSM by clicking on setup and maintenance. That entire administration stuff would not appear on the user profile unless you grant them this particular role. So if you assign a user application implementation consultant role, that user, once you assign this role, that user would be able to see this particular section in the navigation options. So I have not assigned AAC role to a fusion.user1. So that's why you see personalization and troubleshooting right after that. But if you look at a user who has AAC role assigned, you would have administration tab in between. And in that you would have this setup and maintenance. This is quite critical task. And if you give access to this particular task to users, they would be able to do anything in the application, right? So this would let them get into the setup task and they could do anything they want. They could play around with the task, with the setups, they could close the GL period, or they could define a new ledger. They can do whatever they want. So, and for those reasons, again, this particular role, the application implementation consultant, people refer to it with the acronym. They call it AIC role, application implementation consultant. This gives you access to administration under the menu option, and that would give you access to FSM. You can click on setup and maintenance, go into FSM screen. And once you are able to get in there, you would be able to change all the setups left, right, and center. So for this reason, even the AIC role, so in real time, the AIC role in the live environment would be given only to a very few users within a particular department. If you have 10 users working in AR and say 10 users working in a HR module, you don't give AIC role to everyone. You would give that role only to maybe the senior most in that particular team, because once user has access to this, they would be able to change all the setups. Okay. And that's another role that you need to be aware of. And apart from giving access to this particular work area, the AIC role would also give you this particular role inherits a BI administrator role. This particular role inherits a BI administrator role. And what that means is, if you assign this role to a specific user, if that user goes into a reports and analytics work area, if that user goes into reports and analytics work area, this would take you into a BI server or a business intelligence server. You would be able to do pretty much anything in this particular BI server if you have AIC role assigned to your user profile. That's because this particular role inherits a BI administrator role, meaning you are the administrator of a business intelligence server, and which means you could do anything you want. You would be able to see all the reports that others are building, and you could also do whatever, make any changes you want. Okay. So these are few roles that you need to be aware of. And if you go down, and if you sometimes, so the way normally, okay, let's go to the slides first. So if you talk about security, so with the knowledge that we have, if you read these lines, they make much more sense. So security in Infusion Cloud, if you have to explain it in one simple statement, it would control who can do what on which set of data. So for example, if you take the general accountant, he should be able to enter and post journals, and only in a ledger that he has got access to. You could control the who part, you could control the what part, and the which part as well. So you could assign general accountant role to the user until you give him access to it. He wouldn't be able to do anything in that. And similarly, if you take a payable specialist or a supervisor, he should be able to process invoices and payments in the business units that he has got access to. And if you take the heads of HCM, in the case of HCM, the data access works in a slightly different way. You don't grant data access using this particular task, using a manage data access or assign data roles. There is something called as security profiles. So you normally create a security profile, and in that security profile, you would mention what all data access you want to grant to a specific user, and you would assign that security profile to a data role. So we'll see it on Monday. On Monday, I'll show you, I'll explain how to give access or how to grant data access to users in HCM cloud application. In HCM, it works in a slightly different fashion, but in all other modules, financials, SCM, and other modules, the data access works this way. Okay, go back. And yes, this is how security works in cloud, and this is the backbone: privileges to duty roles and duty roles to job roles. And this is a relationship between the duty role definition and the tasks that appear on the screen. And in some cases, you might also be asked to create a custom role. Okay, so you might be asked to customize a seeded role given by Oracle. So you could go back into Security Console. Go to users, or go to roles, maybe. You go to roles, and let's say the client has asked you to make a changes to the accounts payable invoice supervisor role. So client is okay with all the privileges that this particular role gives to the supervisor. It's just that they want you to take out one or two privileges and add few more privileges to it. So they basically want to customize a seeded role with a few minor changes. In such case, it would be foolish to start creating a custom role. Yes, of course, you could create a custom role from scratch, and you could create it, and you could, if there are 100 privileges in there, it would be easy to take out one and add in another two privileges, right? Rather than creating a role with all the 100 privileges. So customizing the seeded role is what you would be doing 99 out of 100 times. And one other time where you create that custom role would be that when you want to grant access of ESS job to others. So let's see how to customize a seeded role. So you pick up a seeded role definition, you pick up a seeded role, and then you click on this drop down. You would be able to, you have an option to edit the role directly. Nobody would stop you. Oracle would not stop you from editing a seeded role. You could click on edit role, take out whatever you don't want, and you could save the role. And you could assign the standard role itself to the users. But that is not the approach you should take, because sometimes you might have to go back to the original definition. In such cases, if you edit the seeded roles, you won't have an option to go back. And you might argue that, yeah, we have a copy role. But even though you have a copy role, we normally don't edit the seeded roles directly. Instead, we copy the roles. And if you copy the role, it would ask you whether you want to copy only the top role or top and the inherited roles, which means you could have multiple levels of inheritance here. So you could have another job role inherited. A job role could inherit could have another job role assigned, and that job role could have another job role assigned. So you have inheritance concept as well in here. Okay, so that's why when you try to copy it, it's asking us whether you want to create only the top role or a top role as well as inherited roles. If you say copy top and inherited roles, or say only the top role, copy it. And when you do this, there is a suffix that is getting added here, right? There is a suffix called GSC getting added. So again, this is coming from the settings option. I would show you on Monday. If you go into administration tab, you have a role copy option in there. And there you could mention, whenever a role is copied, you could mention what needs to be added as a suffix or what needs to be added as a prefix. And in that settings, there would be a suffix selected as GSA. So that is why it is appearing here. So you could change it. You could give your own name in there. Of course, you cannot create a custom role with the same name. You would have to use a name in there. So you could probably say UG. And you could prefix UG as well. And this is a financials job role, right? So that doesn't change, the category doesn't change. And if you go into the next screen, you would see that there is a functional security policies attached here. So these functional security policies, these would let you, the functional security policies, along with the role hierarchy, along with the roles, these two options put together will determine what functionality will be available to you. Okay, so you would be able to see these privileges, standalone privileges assigned, plus the duty roles that are assigned here would control what a user will be able to perform. Okay, so you could see that there are few privileges that are showing up here, and you could, if client says that they don't want their invoice supervisor an ability to view the purchase orders or maintain a reports and analytics region, what you could do, you could select that particular privilege that a client doesn't want to give their invoice supervisor, and you would take it off. And after you take it off, you could also probably take out a couple of more roles if you want. Yeah, that's okay. And then if you go into data security policies, so these data security policies, they would help you, or these privileges would help user to be able to see the values populated in the screens. Say, for example, if you go into accounts payable invoice screen, so if I go into a create invoice screen, first of all, if you go back into the home page, go into payables, and you see invoices in there, right? So if I click on, so how when you add a job role, when you assign the job role to this user, he started seeing these payables and he started seeing the work areas. And when he gets into the work area, he is able to see these navigation options. And within the navigation option, he would, yeah, if you click on this drop down, you could also see the tasks. And these are nothing but the privileges. And within the privilege or within the task, if you get into it, you get to see the fields in there, right? You get to see the supplier side. So for example, to create a PO, I need to select options here. I need to select an invoice type, supplier side. So all these fields, for the user to be able to see the values in these LOVs, there needs to be a data security policies assigned. So what do you see in here? It's a grant on supplier. So that user would be able to see the suppliers in the list here. And you would have plenty of data roles in there, grant on business unit, grant on suppliers, grant on purchase orders in there. So these grant on data access would help user be able to see the data populated within the screens. Okay. And if you go into the next screen, you would see the duty roles that are inherited by that particular job role, or all the roles that are assigned to that particular job role. You could take them off if you want. Say, for example, if you want to take off any of the roles, you could probably take them off. You could pick up any one of them, maybe a payables invoice supervisor, or the transaction entry with budgetary control. You could pick up any of the roles, supplier profile inquiry, pick up any of the role and you delete it. Maybe the client doesn't want to give user ability to query the supplier profiles. You click on next, and you could assign this to the user directly here. So you could assign this role. So what you would do, what client would do, they won't assign accounts payable invoice supervisor seated role to the users. Instead, they assign this custom role to the users. So they would search for fusion.user1, and they would assign this particular role to the users rather than accounts payable invoice supervisor. And you click on next, and you would be able to see the changes that you have done. You have removed one functional security policy, and you have added a role hierarchy. You have removed one role, and you have removed one privilege, and those two are showing up in there. And you have added this role to one user, and this role would be created now, and a process ID has been generated, and you could track this request 32270 from the administration tab. If you go in there, go into role copy status 32270, you could see that that particular role is under processing at the moment. So the custom role would be created, and after it is created, it would be assigned to the user. Okay. There are a few more topics to talk about in security. We will meet again on Monday. So we'll meet again on Monday. This Saturday we'll not have a session, and Sunday as well. From next week, we will have sessions from Monday to Saturday. Any questions, guys? Any questions in what we covered today?
Prasad, quick question. Sorry, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Venkat.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there is an archive and unarchive option, right? Which role controls that archive and unarchive option?
Where do you see that option, archive and unarchive?
When you go to tools, reports, analytics, and if you want to download a catalog, you will see, for example, if I want to migrate one instance to other instance, yeah, see on the left-hand side in the bottoms where you see these two, yeah, sometimes, my client disables them. And when I ask them, they enable again. So which role?
So there would be BA roles, BA administrator, BA developer, BA author roles.
Okay.
So see which of the privilege. So in those roles, there might be a privilege which might be controlling this. So end of the day, it is a task, right? So they might be conditionally enabling and disabling them.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Prasad. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Prasad. So my question was, is it possible to assign roles for multiple users at a time? I mean, rather
yes,
giving it only one. Yeah.
Yes, okay. You can do that. There is a mass upload functionality available. I mean, if you want to give access to multiple, if you want to load, let me go into that particular screen once. So you're talking about assigning roles to the users in bulk,
multiple
right?
users. Yeah.
So what you could do is there are two ways to look at this. So a user could have a person attached to it. Like I mentioned, when employees are loaded, users would be automatically created. But if you want to load in users without link to the persons, there is a REST API available given by Oracle. You don't have a spreadsheet upload here. You have an option to you have a REST API given by Oracle. You could use that REST API to load the roles to multiple users in one shot. You have a REST API available which could help you with it. So if you have 10 users and if you want to assign 10 users 5 to 10 different roles to each user, you could come up with a payload. You could probably get that information from user in a spreadsheet. You could prepare a JSON payload and you could invoke the REST API to achieve that. Okay.
Okay. So that is only for roles, not for user creation, right? Only for role creation for multiple users.
No, the roles would for user creation also you have a REST API. Yeah.
Okay, the same REST API or it's different?
Same REST API. Same REST API. It would I think it would create a role user as well as and then assign a role. You could probably check it out.
Okay.
I have done it sometime back, not
okay,
on top of
okay. Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. We'll meet again tomorrow then. Sorry, not tomorrow, Monday. Thank you.
Yeah.